What are some foods you thought you hated but turned out your parents sucked at cooking them? My housemate insisted he hated mashed potatoes until he tried mine. His mum would literally just mash up boiled potatoes. No salt, no butter, no nothing. My mum's mashed potato is literally about 50% butter and therefore the best thing in the world. I can't even imagine having them without butter. I was raised on canned veggies. I honestly can't think of a time where we ate fresh vegetables. Once I grew up and started cooking for myself, I realized I'll eat almost all vegetables and love salads. Chicken breast. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. Buying a whole chicken was always way cheaper to feed my parents and the 5 of us kids. All my life I thought I didn't like the white meat of chicken. My mom would cook it so long and cut it immediately after it came out of the oven that the white meat was so dry. Duck meat is so much harder to mess up. I just remember chewing and not being able to swallow the chicken dust in my mouth. When I learned how to cook a chicken myself, I was amazed at how different it tasted. Amazing. Now I love all parts of a chicken and make chicken breast for my family all the time. Fast forward to my mom coming over for dinner one night. I pulled the roasted chicken out of the oven and my mom offered to carve it. I told her it needed to rest for like 20 minutes before we could eat it. She looked at me like I was an alien. I feel your pain. I made some chicken for my mother, breaded in panko and oven baked. She insisted that it was underdone because it's too soft. And it's still juicy. Beets. My parents didn't cook them. They came pickled in a can. After I moved out, my dad learned how to cook them properly. I visited home and was simultaneously delighted and enraged that it didn't happen sooner. Oh, I got some. My mother was an awesome woman in many ways, but man, some of her cooking. Fish. Give mom an Arctic char or salmon. She will put it in sink until house smells funny. Then put it on a pan and into the oven. Nothing else. Just hot fish. After I grew up I had pan fried, battered pickerel fillets. Dear God, what I missed out on. Cheesecake. I thought it was sort of a partly jello-like, weak tasting pie. Turns out she made a diet version with a tiny bit of cream cheese, like 1/4 the normal amount, cut with a 3/4 mix of cottage cheese, jello, and something else. First time I tried the real stuff at 30 or so, I almost died. I was in my mid-30s before I ever had turkey made by someone other than mom. Only ever ate a roast turkey at home at Christmas. When I found out it's not a dry, stringy meat, only made edible with the gravy she served, I was again amazed. It needs to be said that she did make the world's best shortbread, baked spaghetti, chocolate pie, and birthday cakes. That cheesecake is a crime. I'm not saying that I won't eat half a cheesecake on my own, but you really don't need a big serving of that. Cut back on the portion, not the delicateness. Soups. My mom would stuff everything in a pot a la Calvin's mom style. Beat it, add water and cook it on high until it tasted like meat and veggie mush, all oily with grease. She'd then serve it, and if I made a face, she would have a meltdown. Once I threw it up while sleeping and it was all over me. I never knew you could puke in your sleep. I finally convinced my mom a year or 3 back that making chicken stock and making chicken soup are 2 separate steps. She finally learned that straining out the meat and veggies that simmered for hours, then cooking fresh meat and veggies is much better than serving mush and rubber. I found out as an adult that when steaming vegetables, if you stopped before the full-on mush stage, they retained their texture and flavor. Explains why kid me preferred raw veggies growing up. I still kinda do. Pork, as good of a cook as my dad is. I don't know if he ever cooked a pork chop that wasn't bone dry. Figuring out pork chops could be juicy was a revelation. Chicken. I appreciate my mom's concern of salmonella, but apparently cooking it a little less leaves a magical thing called moisture in it. My mom had the same problem with pork. Nothing quite like having meat so overcooked it sounds like sawing wood when you try to cut it. Rice and mashed potatoes. My mum always bought easy cook rice, which still tastes soft to me and has the consistency of little rubber pellets. I thought that was how rice was supposed to taste until I had normal basmati rice and realized it's actually delicious. Her mashed potatoes are now referred to as austerity mash. Made without butter or seasoning of any kind. Just potatoes and milk so that you can get through that whole chore of consuming half your daily calories without the risk of having to taste anything. At university my flatmate introduced me to mash flavored with mustard or garlic and it's just wonderful. So that you can get through that whole chore of consuming half your daily calories without the risk of having to taste anything. Beautiful sentence. I'm going to use that. Meatloaf. My dad would take about 0.5 kg of ground beef, add a packet of store-brand meatloaf seasoning, and bake it to a hardened mass that was charred on the outside and a chewy grey in the inside. He'd smother it in ketchup before serving. The ketchup made it barely edible. My mom's recipe for meatloaf was always 1.5 pounds of ground beef and a crap ton of salsa and quick oats, and some rough chopped onions on the fancy days. She'd stick it in a 400-degree oven for 1-2 hours, until the meat was cooked beyond dead and the fat and liquid from the meat and salsa had leached out. I love you, Mom, but please stay away from the kitchen. Spinach. Absolutely, positively spinach. My mother always bought the frozen bricks of it and boiled them to a lump of grey mash. Who'd have known that spinach makes the best salads and is a beautiful, bold green. I felt so betrayed when I discovered how delicious spinach really is. Yep, this boiled spinach was awful, tantrum-inducing stuff. I wasn't a picky eater, but I drew the line at boiled spinach. 30 years later, I willingly eat baby spinach at least once a day. Scrambled eggs. As a kid my parents always made them in the microwave and they always came out rubbery, stiff and soggy. That's just how I thought they were meant to be until someone cooked me scrambled eggs properly many years later and blew my mind. Scrambled eggs in the microwave. If you listen carefully, you can hear Gordon Ramsay crying in the distance. Pancakes. They'd use no leavening and heaps of butter in the pan so they'd be pretty much flat rubbery doughy discs dripping with burnt butter taste. Once I learned how to make fluffy pancakes it was amazing. My mom burns crap because she turns the burner on high. She used to put oil in the pan instead of butter. Imagine oily burnt pancakes. Black. Roast beef. My mom used to way overcook it. It was dark, dry and barely edible. Then one day I had it at a girlfriend's parents' house and it was a revelation. Vegetables in general. I love my mom, but she wasn't a great cook. For example, she had a recipe for stuffed peppers from her grandma. I think that was just horrible. When I moved out to New Mexico and discovered the chili relleno, a stuffed pepper, it blew my freaking mind. To this day I refuse to eat yellow squash because I had to eat slimy, goopy yellow squash at least twice a week, every week growing up. My stomach turned just thinking about it. Almost all of the other things that I hated as a child I now love. I just had to find a guy who knew how to cook. I mean, roasted Brussels sprouts are a thing and they are amazing. Not me, but my boyfriend. His mom was a super hardcore health nut and would always steam veggies into mush for him when he was a kid. I have prepared veggies by grilling, sauteing, frying, baking, and parboiling and he loves it. I will forever be grateful to his mother for making him so easy to impress when it comes to cooking. How can you call yourself health nut when you boil all vitamins out of your veggies? Milk. My mother would always leave milk out for hours or overnight. Whenever I'd get to it, it was spoiled. I just thought that's how milk was until college. That is the most horrifying thing I've ever heard. Pretty much everything. When I learned to cook, I realized that veggies can have a texture other than mushy. Meat can still be pink, and especially seasoning. I grew up with salt, pepper, oregano and in spaghetti sauces, and nowhere else. Chili flakes. I grew up with salt. That's it. For nearly 26 years of my life I thought Thanksgiving turkey was doomed to being decent cuts of dark meat and decidedly meh cuts of white meat. Then came the Thanksgiving of 2016 when I was living in another state with a friend so neither of us were going home until later in December and had to throw our own feast. I cooked my own turkey for the first time and let me tell you it was some of the best meat either of us had ever had. Between us we'd probably had turkeys made by a dozen different family members over our lives and we both emphatically agreed it was the absolute best turkey we had had by a freaking mile. The white meat alone was 100 times better. Moist, tender, flavorful. And the dark meat, oh god the dark meat. It was like angels had blessed every bite. I will never trust anyone else with turkey ever again. Ever. There's some strange understanding that turkey is dry. It's really a case of nobody knowing how the frick to cook a turkey. Rice. Grew up with Uncle Ben's instant rice soaked with a quarter stick of butter. Married a Filipino who introduced me to real rice and a rice cooker. Some marry for money. Some for fame. Others marry for the rice. All vegetables. Turns out you shouldn't dump the contents of canned vegetables into a pot and boil it all until it turns grey. Cool world of funk. And right. My ex's family used a steamer for the vegetables. I was happy when I first saw this as I like a nice crisp vegetable with only a little cooking. Nope. Might as well have boiled those bad boys mush every time. I don't think they understood why people get steamers. I actually had the reverse. My mother was Japanese. I'm adopted, but living in the US. Big point for her was that you live in the US. You make the same food. Many foods though were so simple. What I mean is, you don't really have any recipes or discussion about how to make a hamburger or the like. So, message he always called it by the brand name, Ajinomoto, and soy sauce, shoyu, featured heavily, as well as ginger, sugar, rice wine, parsley. The parsley was a replacement for shiso, etc. My favorite thing though, was sauerkraut. Something she really did not know how to make. She would wash the sauerkraut, and then stir fry with the expected stir fry seasonings and it became this heavenly umami laden dish that perfectly complemented pork chops with soy sauce and message. This is what I thought sauerkraut tasted like. No bitterness at all, and a touch of pepper sauce would put it over the top. Imagine my surprise attending public school and begging for an extra heaping helping of sauerkraut. Little 7-year-old me trying to be helpful by telling the cafeteria workers that their sauerkraut had gone bad. Cooking with Dog has become one of my favorite YouTube channels because it feels like home. TLDR. My mom introduced me to fusion cooking long before that became a thing. It's a shame message got such a bad rap. It wasn't even the real cause of what it was accused of and is perfectly safe and can help a crappy dish perk up. Not me, but my wife. I introduced her to what one can actually do with pork loin. She had been used to her mother serving leathery pork chops, and thought that what all pork was like. Everything was just boiled to heck. Frying something in a pan, fill it up halfway with water and boil it. Making a roast, fill the roasting pan and braise in water. Making veggies, open can and boil until mush. Sausages, occasionally bake some chicken breasts for 45 minutes at 450 degrees until tough and rubbery. I spent most of my adult life learning how to cook properly and the last couple years retraining my poor mother. Steak overdone in the oven and microwaved boiled vegetables. A mash which was every vegetable mashed together. But honestly I can't begrudge them. I hate to sound like a boomer meme but my parents had no internet to learn any better techniques. Zero time after work. And their parents were raised on depression and wartime era fare so it's not like anyone in the family had really tasted good food. We had 3 meals a day, always. And lots of fresh fruit to snack on. My mother baked religiously each week because we couldn't afford store-bought cookies or cake. She worked so hard to feed us and would literally put less on her plate so we could have more. Even now when I go home she will slice fruit and arrange it on a plate for me. I tell her not to do this but she always will. I cook for her and she's so impressed by my skills, which are 100% thanks to reading the internet and the availability of better quality ingredients. I'm a chef and only realized recently that cabbage fricks hard. Have you guys ever had cabbage dry cooked? I mean not steamed, not boiled, not freaking cabbage rolls, like grilled cabbage. It rocked my world. I love roasted cabbage. Just drizzle olive oil, add salt and whatever seasoning you like and stick in the oven. So good. It's the only way my kids will eat cabbage, other than raw in a salad. Not once has my mom ever marinated anything a day in advance. She has never used a slow cooker or really let something cook for more than an hour. She has never used a Goya product and always leaves meat on for too long or at too high of a temp. Eventually, I figured it all out. Then one day we were all at the beach and I had promised to grill the food I had marinated the night before. When I went to light the grill, She argued with me about how nobody was hungry, it's too early, etc. Mom, relax. It's gonna take a while for the grill to be ready. A few minutes later, when the flames are sky high, she asks, so are you just gonna sit there or start cooking your food? I'm gonna sit here. Pork chops. My parents broiled them, then put them in a pot with potatoes and sauerkraut to steam them for a bit. They were tough and flavorless. Then, a friend of mine cooked for us one day and I was thinking, crap, pork chops? I gotta be polite and eat as much as I can stomach. And they were freaking delicious. Tender, sweet, and succulent. Macaroni cheese. Turns out in childhood we had the Tin Tines version that was awful. Actual mac and cheese is the bomb. My mom is far from a bad cook, but she needed to make sure all meat was well done or my dad would pitch a fit. So, I didn't know how amazingly delicious roast beef could be until I had some rare at a restaurant once. I finally got her to start making roasts in the crock pot so they could be cooked all the way through but still moist and tender and yummy. She previously cooked them dry in the oven and they would come out completely dry and tasting like dust. Pot roast, cooked in liquid and well seasoned in the crock pot, is still one of my favorite meals. Tofu. My parents never knew that you had to cook them, so I always ate it raw and was feeling disgusting each time until a vegan friend of mine told me you have to cook it. Giant facepalm. You can actually eat tofu raw. A Japanese dish called hiyaku calls for chilled silken tofu, topped with a little soy sauce, green onions, and bonito flakes. Traditionally, I think it's yummy. It is sometimes called old people food because it's so easy on the teeth. My mother, although very enthusiastic, is unfortunately not a very good cook. She always overcooked meat, only served vegetables as steamed or boiled, didn't season anything, and never let meat rest. She did make incredible gravy though, which saved many a meal. Since leaving home I have been inviting my parents over for dinner and simply blowing their minds with really basic things like roast chicken that has been cooked an appropriate amount of time and rested. My mother dropped in for a cuppa one weekend and I had just finished making a soup from some leftovers and it blew her mind. She had 2 portions for lunch and took a large portion home for my father, leaving me a small bowl for myself. What did I do to make this soup mind-blowing? Just seasoned it well. Fish. They fried them in oil for long, just in case they might taste like fish instead of rancid frying soybean oil. Well, now that I am thinking about it, that's maybe why sashimi is my favorite food. My meat-loving partner said he hated steak. I was confused until I had it at his parents', where his mum grilled in the oven a 1/2-inch steak on both sides until evenly grey throughout. I took him to a restaurant and ordered a good steak medium rare and let him try it. Blew his goddamn mind. My mom burned everything. I was born with a tan. It wasn't that I hated things. I just assumed that the way she prepared them was how they were. I remember eating at a friend's house and having the food be totally delicious, and reporting back to her that this was the case. They must prepare it in an unhealthy way, she said. The peanut butter where you stir in the oil before you use it? She would also drain the oil after purchase and keep it in the fridge, so you had to chisel bits of butter to use. Pizza. When I was a kid, my mom would make pizza, and we almost never went out for it. If we did, it was because my baseball team has won a game, so we'd go to Pizza Hut instead of a local place. My mom didn't want to spend the money on ordering out, especially after buying groceries for a family of 5 every week. So she made the dough herself and used canned tomato sauce and cheap cheese and would cut up sausages and peppers to put on it. It was homemade pizza, so I should have been grateful, but I hated it. I thought it was bland. This was one of those foods which I could never finish. I would leave crusts and whole slices on the plate. My parents would insist I finish it. When I went to college, I would tell people that I hated pizza. They stared in disbelief. Late one night, while drunk with some friends, we ordered a pizza to our dorm. Just some local mom and pop pizza shop that delivers till 3 AM. I didn't expect much. This pizza was cut into triangles, not squares like mom made. I pulled a slice with gooey cheese struggling to cling to the rest of the czar. The scent of oily, salty tomato goodness arrested my senses as I passed the tip beyond my lips. I bit down. Mother of God, I thought. That slice changed my life forever. Now, I'm overweight and have consumed thousands of pizzas in my time. Pad Thai. It was grey. 50% French grey, like the default Photoshop filler option. How did my mother make such innocuous ingredients taste like the inside of an butthole? Any beef roast. I love my mother dearly, and it's kinda hard to frick up most of her recipes, but she can't cook a roast for the life of her. Her roasts are dry as heck and I've actually choked more than once while eating her roast. I was at my ex's for dinner once, and his mom had made a tri-tip roast. I was kinda anxious because of past experiences with roasts. I took my first bite of this roast and almost burst into tears in front of 8 other people. It was so moist and tender, and I swear to this day Jesus himself blessed that roast. I can never eat my mom's roast after that. Sorry mom. Steak. My mom would cook it well done and then some. I don't think I had a rare medium rare steak till I was a teenager and it was so good. Same. Ketchup was the only way I could eat mom's steak. She was shocked when I took her out to a steakhouse as an adult. I thought you hated steak. Broccoli and cauliflower. IDK what my people were doing to it, maybe just boiling it in water and serving it. But I recently had them at a friend's place where they did it 2 ways, grilled and baked, cauliflower, and it was heavenly. Charred broccoli is beautiful. Skirt steak. My mom used to make it so well done. It was more like tough jerky than steak. We'd all be at the table either sawing at it with a steak knife or grabbing it and tearing off pieces with our teeth like animals. It took me years to realize that was blasphemy in the steak world. I'm now down to a comfortable medium rare preference. I can still remember the jaw pain from chewing so hard on that flip-flop of a steak for so long. Bless her heart. My mom would always get pickled beets, and I couldn't even stand the smell, let alone the taste. I thought I just hated beets. Then my brother roasted some, and they were delicious. Still not entirely convinced about the texture, but they tasted great. They also made my urine pink, but that's not necessarily a drawback. Steak. Mum always cooked it well done, and growing up, I dreaded the nights we'd be having steak. Then one night I was at a mate's house and her dad slapped a rare steak on my plate, and because I was too polite to ask to have it cooked a bit more, my entire life changed. I freaking love rare steaks, people. The worst thing you can do with a decent bit of steak is overcook it. I'm not sure I'd go with blue though. Beef roast pot roast. I hated it. My parents would talk about how the meat melted in your mouth. I was always thinking, how? It's dry, tough, and chewy. It's been soaking in its own juice. What the heck? A friend of mine made it when I visited for dinner. The meat wasn't dry. It had flavor. I still have no idea what my parents were doing to mess up a pot roast. Also lasagna. Jesus H. Christ. Lasagna noodles, cottage cheese, a small can of tomato sauce, ground beef, and cheese on top. My mom's lasagna is, to this day, the only bland lasagna I've ever had. My dad is a picky eater and abusive. I blame him for forcing my mom to cook such awful, tasteless foods. Probably cooking it to high for a shorter period of time. Pot roasts need to be low and slow. My mom made the same roast for 20 years. Funny, for me it was the other way around. I used to eat tacos all the time at Taco Bell. I couldn't go anywhere else because Taco Bell was the closest to my school and the other stores were literally a 20-minute walk. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give those tacos a 7, average. One day, my mother made tacos which she had never done before. I took one bite, just one frickin' bite, and I fell in love. I learned the recipe from my mother, started making them and packing them. I literally stopped going to Taco Bell afterwards. My mother never disappoints me. Love her. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give those tacos a 7, average. Bruh, 7/10 is a good score. An average taco would be 5/10. Amen to homemade tacos though, nothing better. Hummus. Growing up vegetarian and low income meant that my mum homemade a lot of stuff with chickpeas and lentils, which was coupled with the you stay at the table until you finish your meal rule. The hummus was always super grainy and awful. I had the shop bought stuff at 20 and it was like a totally different food. Getting a smooth hummus is pretty hard without the right ingredients or equipment. Like the other poster mentioned, add tahini. You'll also want some extra virgin olive oil, garlic, salt, and maybe some pepper for a slight kick. I recommend making hummus with an immersion blender in a mason jar or similarly shaped long container. Regular blenders won't get it smooth enough. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.